The scream cut through the Valenti estate like a blade drawn slow across stone. It wasn't the cry of hunger. It wasn't the whimper of discomfort. It was raw, panicked, animal, high-pitched enough to make crystal chandeliers vibrate, sharp enough to crawl under the skin and stay there. Lorenzo Valenti sat perfectly still at the head of the mahogany table. 40 chairs surrounded him, 40 empty seats carved from imported walnut, upholstered in silk flown in from Milan. Men had died to earn the right to sit at this table. Tonight, none dared. The scream came again. Longer this time. Lorenzo's fingers tightened around the rim of his glass. The ice inside clinked softly, an obscene sound in the face of that terror upstairs. He had ordered absolute silence in the house. No footsteps, no murmurs, no radios. Still, the sound found him. It always did. 3 months. For 3 months, the cry of his infant son had ruled this fortress more completely than Lorenzo ever ruled the underworld. Physically perfect, the doctors had said. Perfect. The word curdled in his chest. Another scream. This one fractured, breaking into choking gasps, like tiny lungs fighting for permission to exist. A muscle jumped in Lorenzo's jaw. He stood. The guards at the doors straightened instantly, hands brushing jackets where weapons rested. They had seen this look before, right before a man disappeared, right before a decision that could not be undone. Lorenzo didn't acknowledge them. He walked. The hallway floors were cold marble, veined with gray like old scars. His shoes made no sound. They never did. The walls were lined with portraits, men with Lorenzo's eyes but none of his restraint, fathers, uncles, enemies he had outlived. The scream sharpened as he climbed. Upstairs, the nursery glowed too brightly. Soft light bounced off silk walls dyed the color of milk. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender, clean, controlled, wrong. The elite nanny stood over the crib. She was immaculate, hair pinned tight, uniform pressed so sharply it could cut, a degree in child psychology framed on the wall behind her like a weapon. The baby was red. Not flushed, not warm. Red as if his skin were reacting to fire. "SHH," the nanny snapped, her voice clipped, brittle. "Stop this." She reached down. The moment her gloved fingers touched the baby's arm, the scream exploded. The infant arched violently, tiny hands clenching, face contorting in agony far too big for a body so small. His cry turned hoarse, desperate, like he was drowning in air. The nanny recoiled. "Signor," she said sharply, turning as Lorenzo filled the doorway. "He's being difficult again." "Difficult?" Lorenzo stared at his son. Leo Valenti, 3 months old, heir to everything Lorenzo had built and destroyed in equal measure. The child's skin burned crimson where the nanny had touched him. Lorenzo felt something inside his chest tear, not loudly, not cleanly, but slow and ragged, like fabric pulled too far. "How many?" he asked quietly. The nanny hesitated. "This is the 13th episode today." 13. 13 specialists had stood in this room. 13 men and women with hands steady enough to cut brains open, voices calm enough to deliver death sentences. They came in armored convoys. They brought machines that hummed and beeped and glowed. They all said the same thing. The child is physically perfect. Lorenzo stepped closer to the crib. The nanny stiffened. "Signor, perhaps it's best if—" The baby screamed again. Lorenzo reached out instinctively. The moment his finger brushed his son's wrist, Leo shrieked. The sound ripped through Lorenzo like a gunshot fired inside his skull. The baby's back arched violently, breath hitching, face turning a terrifying shade of purple. Lorenzo jerked his hand back as if burned. His own blood pounded in his ears. "Don't touch him." That was the rule now. A mafia king who couldn't hold his own child. Lorenzo straightened slowly. His hand drifted not consciously toward the holster at his side. The weight of the gun was familiar, comforting. It solved problems. It ended noise. The nanny watched him carefully. Down the hall, unseen, unheard by anyone important, a woman froze. Elena stood with a bucket of ash clutched in her hands. She had been scrubbing the soot from the West Wing fireplaces since before sunrise. Her arms ached. Her fingers were cracked, raw from lye and cold water. The faded gray of her uniform had been patched 3 times, once at the elbow, twice along the seam where it split under too much work. She wasn't supposed to be here. Grade 3 maids weren't assigned upstairs. But the scream had stopped her. It always did. Even now, standing in the shadow of a column, Elena felt it vibrate in her bones. She smelled the sharp chemical tang of the nursery even from here. Fireproofing agents, treated fabrics, expensive cleanliness that burned the throat if you breathed too deeply. She saw Lorenzo Valenti for the first time up close. Not the myth, not the name whispered in fear. Just a man standing helplessly beside a crib. The baby screamed again. And something inside Elena, quiet, buried under years of survival, shifted. Hours earlier, before the screaming ruled the house, Elena's morning had begun the same way it always did. Darkness. The bakery below her apartment rattled to life before dawn. The smell of yeast and burnt sugar crept through the floorboards, mixing with the sour scent of cheap detergent that never quite left her clothes. Her mother coughed in the other room. A wet rattling sound. Elena sat up instantly, feet touching the cold floor. Her coat hung on the back of the chair, frayed cuffs, lining worn thin as paper. She pulled it on anyway. "Ma," she whispered. "I'm all right," came the lie from behind the wall. Elena knew better. She always did. She boiled water on the tiny stove, the flame sputtering like it might give up at any second. She crushed pills carefully, mixing them into a spoonful of honey. When she brought it to her mother, she smiled the smile she practiced every day, the one that said, "I can handle this." Then she left. Outside, the city was gray and damp. Stale rain clung to the sidewalks. Elena joined the silent stream of workers heading toward places they didn't own, lives they couldn't stop. The Valenti estate rose at the edge of the city like a challenge. Cold stone walls, iron gates, guards who didn't look at faces, only uniforms. Elena entered through the service entrance. Inside, warmth hit her first, artificial, expensive. Gold leaf mirrors lined the hallways, polished daily by hands that never saw their reflections. Elena kept her eyes down. She knew the rule. Grade 3 maids were invisible. She passed a Grade 1 maid once, perfumed, gliding, silk shoes whispering against marble. They didn't acknowledge each other. They weren't allowed to. Elena was handed her tools without a word. 5 fireplaces, West Wing. Ash clung to her skin by mid-morning. The smell followed her everywhere. No matter how much she scrubbed, it stayed, like poverty itself, announcing her presence before she spoke. And then the screaming began. It rolled through the house like thunder trapped indoors. The other staff stiffened, then resumed work faster, quieter. No one commented. No one asked questions. Everyone knew better. Except Elena. She had noticed things. Little things. The way the baby screamed worse when the silk curtains were drawn. The way his cries sharpened when the elite nanny changed his blankets. The way the smell of the nursery, sharp, chemical, made Elena's own skin itch when she passed the doorway. She didn't have the words for it, but she felt it. Now, standing frozen in the hallway, Elena watched Lorenzo Valenti lower his hand from his weapon. The nanny spoke quickly. "Signor, the doctors assured us." "Enough," Lorenzo said. The word was soft. Dangerously soft. The baby's scream cracked again, then faltered, turning into choking sobs. Lorenzo closed his eyes. For a moment, just one, he saw blood instead of silk, smoke instead of chandeliers, a younger version of himself holding a dying man, realizing power meant nothing when life slipped through your fingers. He opened his eyes. Elena swallowed. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to think. She wasn't supposed to feel this tightening in her chest, this unbearable pull toward the sound of pain. Her bucket slipped slightly in her grip. The metal handle clinked. The sound was tiny, but in the sudden quiet between screams, it was loud enough. Every head turned. The nanny's eyes snapped toward her, sharp with irritation. "What are you doing here?" Elena felt heat rush to her face. I was cleaning." "Leave," the nanny snapped. "Now." The baby screamed again. Lorenzo didn't look at Elena. But he didn't tell her to leave either. Elena hesitated. Her heart hammered. Images of her mother flashed through her mind. Rent overdue. Warnings already written in red ink. If she spoke, she could lose everything. If she didn't. The scream broke into a sobbing gasp that sounded too much like suffocation. Elena took a step forward. The nanny spun on her. "Did you not hear me?" The guards shifted. Lorenzo finally looked at Elena. Really looked. She was small, worn, gray uniform patched and faded, hands rough, knuckles scarred. She smelled faintly of ash and soap and something human the nursery lacked entirely. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked. Elena's mouth was dry. Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. I think he's hurting." The nanny scoffed. "Of course he's hurting, he's a difficult child." Elena shook her head slowly. "No, I think something here is hurting him." Silence. The baby screamed again. Lorenzo stared at Elena like she was a puzzle. He hadn't decided whether to break or solve. For 3 months, money had failed him, power had failed him, fear had failed him. Now a maid stood in his nursery, ash on her sleeves, daring to speak. "Leave us," Lorenzo said. The nanny froze. "Signor." "Out." The word cracked like a whip. The nanny opened her mouth, then closed it. She straightened, dignity bristling, and walked past Elena without looking at her. The door shut. The scream filled the room again. Lorenzo turned to Elena. "You have 10 seconds, he said. "Explain yourself." Elena's knees shook. She didn't know yet that this moment would split her life into before and after. She only knew that a baby was crying. And someone had to listen. Creating a story of this depth and emotion takes dozens of hours of research and writing to ensure every heartbeat is felt. If you feel the weight of this story, please consider subscribing. It is the greatest way to support the hard work that goes into bringing these lessons to life for you. Have you ever felt like the whole world was against you while everyone else looked the other way? Share your experience in the comments so we can support each other. Silence fell heavy in the nursery after the door closed. It wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that waits to see who will break first. Leo's cries softened into jagged whimpers, his tiny chest shuddering as if even breathing hurt. His skin remained flushed, angry red against the pale silk lining of the crib. Elena stood very still. 10 seconds. She felt each one like a finger pressing into her spine. "I cleaned the west wing," she said finally. Her voice was low, careful. 5 fireplaces. I see everything that settles into the house. Dust, ash, chemicals." Lorenzo didn't move. "You are a maid." "Yes, signor." "You scrub floors." "Yes." "You have no medical training." "No." Leo whimpered again, a thin sound like paper tearing. Elena swallowed. "But I have skin and I have eyes." That earned her a reaction. Lorenzo turned fully now, dark eyes sharp. He studied her the way he studied men before deciding their fate, not cruelly, not kindly. Precisely. "Speak," he said. Elena gestured, hesitant at first. The nursery smells different, not like soap, not like cotton, like burning almost. When the curtains are drawn, his crying gets worse. When the blankets are changed, worse. When, she stopped herself, breath catching. When bare skin touches him, even through fabric that's been washed too many times to keep its softness, it hurts him less. Lorenzo looked at the crib. At the silk walls, the imported rugs, the fireproof drapes that had cost more than entire apartment buildings. "You're saying," he said slowly, "my house is hurting my son." Elena didn't answer right away. This was the moment. Lie and live quietly, tell the truth and disappear. She thought of her mother's coughing, of the bakery heat seeping through the floorboards, of how pain always went unnoticed when it came from people like her. "Yes," she said. The word landed like a slap. For a moment, Elena thought he would strike her. Instead, Lorenzo laughed. It was short, sharp, empty. "Do you know," he said, "how many men have died because they thought they understood my world better than I did?" Elena's hands trembled. "I'm not talking about your world, Signor. I'm talking about his." She nodded toward the baby. Leo whimpered again, face twisting. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Before he could speak, the door flew open. The elite nanny stormed in. Her composure was cracked now, cheeks flushed, lips tight with outrage. "Signor, this is completely inappropriate. That woman has no authorization to be here. No clearance. No." "Enough," Lorenzo snapped. The nanny froze. He didn't look at her. His gaze never left Elena. "You will leave." The nanny exhaled sharply, relieved. "Of course, I'll have security escort." "I was not speaking to her." The room went still. Lorenzo turned slowly. "You are dismissed." The nanny blinked. "Signor, you are no longer assigned to my son." Her face drained of color. "You can't be serious. I have credentials, years of—" "My son screams when you touch him," Lorenzo said. His voice was calm, too calm. "You scream at him when he cries. That is a gross mischaracterization." "Leave," he said. The word ended the conversation. The nanny's mouth opened, then closed. She straightened, pride wounded, eyes burning with humiliation as she turned, straight toward Elena. "This," she hissed under her breath as she passed, "is what happens when you let trash speak." Elena flinched. The door slammed. The silence returned, but now it was heavier, dangerous. Lorenzo exhaled slowly. "Do not misunderstand," he said to Elena. "You are not here because I trust you. You are here because everything else has failed." Elena nodded. "That's enough." He gestured toward the crib. "Then explain why my son screams like he's being skinned alive." Elena stepped closer. The guards shifted instantly, hands moving to weapons. Lorenzo raised a hand. Elena stopped at the edge of the rug. She didn't cross it. Something about it made her skin crawl. She pointed instead. "That rug, the curtains, the blankets, they've been treated." "Fireproofed," Lorenzo said. "Bullet-resistant, imported." "Yes," Elena said, "with chemicals." So some skins can't tolerate them, especially new skin, especially Bobby's." Lorenzo frowned. "The doctors." "Doctors don't scrub floors," Elena said softly. "They don't smell what settles after years." Leo whimpered again. Elena's eyes flicked to the crib. She noticed something else now, tiny red patches on his wrist, his neck, places where fabric touched most. Her chest tightened. She remembered another room, another smell. A factory floor from years ago. Her younger brother coughing, skin breaking out in angry welts after long shifts handling treated textiles. The company doctors had said it was nothing. 2 weeks later, he was dead. Elena clenched her fists. "This isn't sickness," she said. "It's exposure." Lorenzo stared at his son. For the first time, doubt cracked his certainty. "Leave," he said abruptly. Elena's heart dropped. "Signor." "Not forever," he said. "For now." She bowed her head, backing away. As she reached the door, Leo screamed again, loud, desperate. Elena turned instinctively. The baby's tiny fingers clenched the edge of the blanket, face contorting in pain. Lorenzo looked at her. Something unspoken passed between them. "Tomorrow," he said, "you will come back." Elena nodded. She left the nursery on legs that barely held her. The punishment came swiftly. By morning, the estate buzzed. Whispers followed Elena through the halls, eyes lingered, shoulders turned away. The elite nanny had spoken. Elena was reassigned. Basement level, laundry and waste. Her pay was docked for overstepping her role. A supervisor leaned close and whispered, "You should have stayed invisible." The basement smelled of bleach and rot. Machines roared endlessly. Steam soaked her uniform until it clung to her skin. Still, Elena worked. She always did. But her mind stayed upstairs, with a baby screaming into silence. That afternoon, as she folded linens, she noticed something that made her pause. A stack of discarded nursery blankets. Silk ivory untouched. She brushed her forearm against one accidentally. Her skin prickled instantly, a sharp sting like a mild burn. Elena sucked in a breath. There it was. Proof. She looked around. No one was watching. She pulled from her pocket a small scrap of cotton, part of her old undershirt she'd torn to patch her uniform months ago. She rubbed it against her skin. Nothing. Elena stared at the contrast. Her heart began to race. That night, as she climbed the stairs back toward the upper floors to return cleaning supplies, she felt eyes on her. One of the guards stood near the corner. Not hostile. Observing. "You're the maid," he said quietly. Elena nodded. "The baby," he added. "He was quieter today." Her breath caught. Was he? The guard shrugged. For a while. Hope flickered small, dangerous. Elena continued down the hall. At the end, Lorenzo Valenti stood alone, staring through a window at the city below. He didn't turn. "You were punished," he said. "Yes." "For speaking." "Yes." Silence stretched. "My son slept," Lorenzo said finally, "for 12 minutes." Elena closed her eyes. 12 minutes was a lifetime. "I want you in the nursery tomorrow night," Lorenzo said, "when it's worst." Elena hesitated. "Signor, if I'm wrong." "If you're wrong," he said, turning now, eyes dark, "you go back to the basement." She nodded. "And if I'm right?" Lorenzo looked past her, back toward the nursery. "Then everything changes. Why do you think some people lose their humanity when they gain power? Let's discuss in the comments." Night fell over the Valenti estate without ceremony. No moon, no stars, only the low hum of generators and the distant city breathing beyond the walls. Inside the mansion, the air felt tighter, charged, like a storm pressing down without rain. Elena washed her hands carefully in the staff bathroom. The water was too hot, the soap too harsh. She scrubbed until her knuckles burned, then stopped herself. Bare skin, she reminded herself. She dried her hands on her old undershirt, the soft cotton she wore beneath the patched gray uniform. It was threadbare, stretched thin from 10 years of washing, but it felt like home, like safety. Her reflection stared back at her from the spotted mirror. Tired eyes, hair pulled back too tight, a woman who had learned to take up as little space as possible. Tonight she would take up space. A guard escorted her upstairs. The closer they got to the nursery, the louder the sound became. Leo was screaming. Not crying, screaming. The sound ripped through the hallways, raw and ragged, as if each breath scraped his throat on the way out. Elena felt it in her teeth, in her ribs. The guard swallowed hard. "It's been hours." Elena nodded, her chest tight. They reached the door. Inside, chaos reigned in quiet ways. The silk curtains were drawn. The lights were dimmed to a soft, expensive glow. 3 doctors stood off to the side, murmuring urgently into phones. A new nanny hovered uselessly near the wall, hands clasped, eyes wide with fear. And Lorenzo Valenti. He stood near the crib, shirt wrinkled, jacket gone, hair no longer perfect. Dark circles carved shadows beneath his eyes. The scream tore out of Leo again, violent enough to make his tiny body shake. One doctor spoke quickly. "Signor, we recommend sedation, just until morning." Another nodded. "He's exhausting himself." Lorenzo didn't respond. He was staring at his son. At the way his skin burned red where the blanket touched him. At the tiny tremors running through his limbs. "Sedate him. Put him to sleep. Hide the pain." Elena stepped forward. The doctors turned sharply. "Who is she?" Lorenzo lifted a hand. The room stilled. "She's the reason you're still standing in my house," he said coldly. "Be quiet." Elena's heart pounded as she approached the crib. Up close, the smell was unmistakable now, chemical, sharp, clinging. It coated the air, settled into the silk, burned the back of her throat. Leo's eyes were squeezed shut, tears streaking his flushed cheeks. His cries broke into wet gasps, each one weaker than the last. Elena felt panic claw at her chest. This was worse than before. She looked at Lorenzo. "May I?" He hesitated. For 3 months, every touch had hurt his son. Every instinct screamed, "Don't." But there was nothing left to lose. "Do it," he said. Elena didn't reach for the baby. Instead, she knelt on the cold marble floor. The shock of it shot through her knees, grounding her. Then she began to hum. It was a sound she hadn't made in years. A melody from her childhood, slow, low, like wind moving through mountain pines. Her mother used to hum it while braiding her hair, while the world outside felt too loud, too sharp. The sound wove through the room. The screaming faltered. Just for a moment. Everyone froze. Elena reached for the buttons of her uniform. The doctor stared. "What is she doing?" Lorenzo didn't stop her. One button, then another. She slipped the rough, treated fabric from her shoulders, letting it fall to the floor like a discarded shell. Beneath it was her undershirt, simple cotton, faded almost white, thin as breath. The kind of fabric that had been washed so many times it no longer resisted touch. The room seemed to inhale. Elena slid the undershirt off as well. She stood there in the sterile glow, arms bare, skin marked by scars and years of work. No silk, no treatment, no protection. Just human skin. "This is inappropriate," one doctor muttered. Elena ignored him. She extended her forearm slowly, deliberately toward the baby. Lorenzo's muscles locked. Every guard tensed. The moment stretched thin as wire. Elena touched Leo, not to his hand, not to his face, but laid him gently against the inside of her forearm, pressing his burning skin to hers. Skin to skin. Untreated, unfiltered. Leo screamed once more. Then stopped. Not abruptly. Gradually. As if his body was relearning what safety felt like. His breath stuttered, then smoothed. His tiny fingers unclenched. The violent red of his skin softened to pink. A sound replaced the scream. A sigh. It slipped out of him like he'd been holding it his whole life. The room went silent. No one moved. Lorenzo's chest hitched. For the first time in 90 days, his son was not in pain. Tears blurred his vision before he realized they were there. Elena kept humming softly now. She felt the heat of the baby's skin ease against hers, felt his tiny heartbeat steady. She exhaled shakily. "It's the fabrics," she said quietly, All of them. The doctors stared, stunned. Elena lifted her eyes to Lorenzo. Your wealth is poisoning him, Signor, not intentionally, but completely. She glanced around the room, the silk, the rugs, the curtains. Fireproofing chemicals, preservation agents. They're designed to resist flame, to last forever. Her voice trembled, his skin can't. Lorenzo sank into the chair beside the crib. No one told me, he whispered. They didn't look, Elena said gently. They trusted the price tags. One of the doctors swallowed hard. We didn't test for chemical sensitivity at that level. Elena nodded. My brother worked in a textile factory once. Same treatments, same smell. Her voice broke. They said it was nothing. Lorenzo looked up sharply. What happened to him? He died, she said simply, because no one believed a poor boy's skin could tell the truth. The words landed like a verdict. Lorenzo closed his eyes. For the first time in his life, there was no one to punish. Only himself. I will give you anything, he said hoarsely. Money, a house, protection, name it. Elena looked down at Leo, sleeping peacefully against her arm. Then back at Lorenzo. Build a clinic, she said, in the district where the mothers are too poor to buy even cow's milk. Lorenzo stared at her. Not confused. Shaken. Why, he asked. Because if my brother had won, she said softly, he'd still be alive. Lorenzo nodded once. It will be done. Elena carefully placed Leo back into the crib, lined now with a simple cotton cloth someone had hurriedly fetched. The baby slept. Real sleep. Lorenzo reached out slowly, hesitantly, and touched his son's foot. Leo didn't scream. Lorenzo covered his mouth with his hand and broke. If you had the power to change one person's life today, even if it cost you everything, would you do it? Type, yes, if you believe in the power of kindness. Morning light entered the Valenti estate cautiously, as if unsure it was welcome. It slipped past curtains that had never been opened before, touching marble floors that usually reflected nothing but artificial glow. The house felt different, quieter but not tense, like something heavy had been set down. In the nursery, Leo slept. Not the shallow, trembling doze of exhaustion, but deep, steady rest. His chest rose and fell evenly, wrapped in plain cotton so unremarkable it would never appear in a catalog. Lorenzo stood beside the crib, afraid to breathe too loudly. For the first time since his son's birth, the silence didn't feel like a threat. Behind him, Elena folded the discarded silk blankets into a neat pile. She worked slowly, deliberately, as if every movement mattered. They will be burned, Lorenzo said. Elena paused, burned. They won't leave this house, he replied, or any other. She nodded once. Justice didn't always need to be loud. The reckoning began before noon. The elite nanny arrived in heels sharp enough to announce her anger before her voice did. She marched into the great hall with practiced indignation, credentials in hand, confidence reinforced by years of being untouchable. She stopped when she saw Elena standing beside Lorenzo. The silence was surgical. You, the nanny said, disbelief curling her lip. This is a mistake. She manipulated you in a moment of weakness. Lorenzo didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. My son slept for 7 hours, he said calmly. He has not screamed once since you left. The nanny scoffed. Correlation is not causation. Lorenzo stepped closer. Each step felt final. You touched him, he said. He screamed. You yelled at him, he continued. He screamed harder. You were paid to care, he finished, and you chose control instead. Her face flushed. I followed protocol. You followed pride, Lorenzo said. You are dismissed. Her mouth opened, closed. You will not work with children again, he added. Not in this city. The guards moved. The elite nanny was escorted out past the gold mirrors she once admired herself in. She didn't look back. Elena exhaled quietly. By the end of the week, the Valenti estate no longer smelled like chemicals. The curtains were replaced with untreated cotton, the rugs removed, the fireproofing stripped from the nursery at tremendous cost. Lorenzo didn't care. For the first time, money felt useful. Elena returned to her regular duties, but something had shifted. No one called her grade 3 anymore. Staff greeted her by name. Her pay was restored, then doubled. She still wore the same coat with frayed cuffs. Some things she refused to replace. One afternoon, Lorenzo approached her in the courtyard. He wasn't wearing a suit. Just a simple cotton shirt, sleeves rolled up awkwardly like a man borrowing another life. "They broke ground today," he said. Elena looked up. "The clinic?" "Yes." She smiled. It was small, tired, real. Lorenzo hesitated. "Why did you refuse the money?" Elena thought for a moment. "Because money disappears, buildings stay." He nodded. "I don't know how to be this man," he admitted. Elena watched him carefully. "Neither did I learned by watching people who tried." Months passed. The newspapers noticed. The butcher of Sicily funds free maternal clinic. Mafia boss turns philanthropist. Lorenzo ignored them. He spent his mornings on a park bench. No guards nearby, no weapons visible. Just a man in a cotton shirt holding his son. At first his hands shook. Elena sat beside him, correcting gently. "Support his neck, he trusts you." Lorenzo adjusted. Leo gurgled. Lorenzo laughed, a sound so unused it startled him. "I used to think fear was how you protect what's yours," he said quietly. Elena watched a pigeon hop across the path. "Fear protects power, presence protects people." He nodded slowly, committing it to memory. Years later, the clinic stood bright against a neighborhood long used to being forgotten. Mothers lined up before dawn. Children laughed inside clean rooms that smelled like soap, not chemicals. A plaque hung near the entrance. No name. Just words. Built because one voice was finally heard. Across town, a boy ran across a playground, his laughter loud and unafraid. Lorenzo sat nearby, older now, softer. Leo clutched his finger, skin healthy, eyes bright. Elena passed them on her way home from work. She still lived above the bakery. Still wore her coat. But when she walked like someone who knew her weight mattered. Lorenzo met her eyes. They nodded. No ceremony. Just recognition. Because the unimaginable wasn't the removal of silk. It wasn't the money. It was the moment a maid taught a monster how to be a father. Remember, the person who saves you isn't always the one with the most money, but the one with the most heart.